I am going to rank the best and worst perk of each category of killer perks. So let's start with aura reading perks. Best, Lethal Pursuer. Without a doubt, Lethal Pursuer has become the strongest aura reading perk in the game. This single perk has so many synergies with different perks and add-ons and so many build loadouts that I would go as far as to say that this is the most synergistic perk in Dead by Daylight. And the fun thing is that this effect is only the secondary part of the perk, as its main use is to show the aura of all survivors at the start of the match. While this looks like something very basic and a one-time use, the early game is the most crucial moment for any killer in Dead by Daylight, so Lethal Pursuer can change the fate of the entire match based on how it started. It is amazing on killers with high mobility like Nurse or Blight, and also amazing on killers that need to find survivors fast like the Ghostface or Oni. It is one of my favorite perks in Dead by Daylight. For the worst, I chose Territorial Imperative. This perk reveals the aura of a survivor that enters the basement for 3 seconds while you're at least 32 meters away. It also has a cooldown. This perk is really bad, and it's mostly due to the range requirement to be as far as possible. Sometimes, survivors might try to hide or enter the basement while you are 32 meters close, so this perk will not notify you in that case. It needs a rework, which is funny because it has been in the game for 5 years and it's possibly one of the least used perks in the game, yet the only change it got was a reduction of its cooldown. The problem of this perk is the design of it, because if you plan to use it with a Leatherface to camp the basement from 32 meters away and come back every time the perk notifies you, then it is indeed very broken and hard to counter, so it's just a perk for basement campers. Now let's talk about the slowdown category, and for the best, I chose Corrupt Intervention. There is not a single perk that makes such a high difference than Corrupt Intervention. The early game is by far the most crucial part of any DBD match, and just like Lethal Pursuer, this perk helps massively to protect you and give you time in order to start the match without a major drawback. This perk prevents survivors from repairing the generators that spawn close to them and forces them to either move closer to the killer to find and repair an unblocked gen, or I've seen cases where survivors just wait it out. Killers like Trapper, Hag, or any killer that is not very strong in the end game like Pig and Oni benefit a lot from this perk. And trust me, in reality, the nerf, the Corrupt Intervention, hardly did anything to it. For the worst, I chose Grim Embrace. Technically, Trailing Tremors is the worst gen slowdown perk, but it is mostly used as a tracking perk rather than a slowdown one. For that reason, I decided to go with Grim Embrace, and while on paper it does sound kinda strong, this perk on practice is very bad. Once you hook 4 different survivors, Grim Embrace will activate, blocking all generators for 40 seconds and revealing the aura of the obsession. The thing is, if you hook your obsession, you won't see the aura of nobody. Plus, survivors can wait the timeout, and even then, the timer activates once you hook the last unique survivor. So by default, 2 survivors will not be on gens, that is the hooked survivor and the one that was going to rescue them. Finally, there are some matches where you will not be able to hook all 4 survivors, and in high MMR, it is always the best idea to tunnel out a survivor out of the match as soon as possible. So Grim Embrace ends up being the worst slowdown perk in the game. Sad, considering the perk design promotes a healthier playstyle overall. Let's talk about tracking, and for the best, I chose Infectious Fright. Infectious is a very powerful tracking tool that aids all killers with a snowball potential like Myers, Plague or Oni with downing more than 1 survivor with their power before it expires. Not only that, even normal killers can use this perk to know if there are any flashlight or pellet savers around you once you down a survivor. And it's really great how it now works with any type of attack, so even Trapper's traps work. The only downside is that it works based on terror radius, so silent killers or killers with a smaller radius are not as good with this perk. For the worst, I chose Predator, one of the worst killer perks in the game. Predator does not help at all in chase, and in fact, it can confuse you, which is worse. Most of the times, killers have a different tracking perk or no tracking perk whatsoever, and this perk would still be useless to them, as the best used scenario is to find a healthy survivor that is running, because the moment you hit a survivor, you can hear them cry or see the blood pools in the ground and track them that way. Predator needs a rework. Now let's talk chase perks, one of my favorite types of perks, and the best one is Bamboozle. Bamboozle is the strongest chase perk in Dead by Daylight and a must-have in a lot of killers as it makes their life so much easier. This single perk can completely shut down entire loops and infinites, forcing the survivors to run away, so killers like Leatherface, Oni or Hillbilly can punish those survivors. This perk is not for every killer, but for those that need it, it is almost as impactful as Corrupt Intervention, and a good choice for any M1 killer. For the worst, Beast of Prey. This perk is supposed to help you while you're in a chase, but the effect only kicks in after Bloodlust tier 1, and by that time, you most likely will not gain any use of this perk. Again, this perk is completely useless, and even the chase BP bonus is not that good, because it only helps you reach the cap faster, it does not make you go past it. The effect is mediocre, as it hides your red stain, which you can do by mind gaming yourself, and with some killers this perk is just straight up useless. I don't think there is a single build or situation where I wish I had this perk equipped. Next up we have Hex Perks, and the best one for me is Pentimento. I do have to admit that this perk by itself is not that stellar, but when combined with literally any other Hex perk, especially Plaything, it becomes a serious time waster for survivors that they cannot ignore. Pentimento is basically an extra objective to survivors for each totem that they break, and if you get 5 totems on the same match, that means it's game over for them. But nobody uses it to try and get 5 totems. The main use is the first totem that gives a 30% cooldown reduction in generator speeds, and that effect is huge. The worst, Hex Ruin. Ruin was one of the strongest perks in Dead by Daylight since it was introduced, and after the last nerf they did to it, it is weird for me to say that Ruin is by far the worst Hex perk in the game, while there are other perks like Thrill of the Hunt or Undying that by themselves are very underwhelming, and then we have the third seal, which for most people would be the worst Hex in the game. Ruin is the only one where I find it worse to have that perk than to not equip it. This is because the only effect it has is that generators will start to regress by themselves on such a slow rate that it takes 4 seconds for a generator to regress 1 second of progress, and you cannot combine Call of Brine or Overcharge with it. Worst part of all, this perk will deactivate once you sacrifice a survivor, if it lasts long enough. I don't see any reason to use Ruin in the current state besides a very niche YouTube gameplay featuring surveillance. Going back to Slowdown, we have Regression Perks, and the best one for me is Call of Brine. This perk is extremely good, and with the new meta, this perk became even better. It will duplicate the amount of regression a generator kick does, which is already huge by itself, but it also has a tracking component on a perk that will help you know if a survivor came back to the broken generator and started repairing it. Honestly, there is no reason not to use this perk, as it's very good no matter what build you get, and it becomes even stronger when combined with Overcharge and Eruption, 2 perks that I would love to put in this spot as well. In fact, I would go as far as to say that all gen regression perks, including Jolt, are very good, and only one perk is the outlier. And that perk is the worst regression perk, Oppression. This could have been a very good and interesting choice. However, what completely kills it is the extremely long cooldown that this perk has, and the fact that good survivors, once they know you have Oppression, will be more prepared to hit the small skill check while repairing a gen. For that reason, compared to other gen regression perks like Pop, Jolt, Pain Resonance, Oppression is weakish. Obsession Perks. And we have the best and one of my favorites, save the best for last. Demogorgon and Deathslinger mains will agree with me that this is one of the most satisfying perks to use in the game, and the recent small buff to it made it even easier for me to rank it as the best obsession perk in the game by a huge margin. It works really well with most killers, especially those that can keep the stacks by using their secondary power to attack the obsession. but it also works very well on M1 killers like Trapper or Clown, surprisingly. I think once you try this perk and feel the advantage it gives you, it's hard to go back. Worst one, Furtive Chase. I will never understand what the point of this perk is. It's supposed to be an obsession perk that gives you a smaller terror radius in a chase, but the main use I have seen people give this perk is the obsession transfer to their rescuer. Besides that small niche use that by itself is useless, I don't see this perk as anything close to a good perk. Now let's talk about Scourge Hooks, and the best one is Pain Resonance. I don't think I even need to explain why this perk is still amazing. It rewards you for hooking by giving gen slowdown to the one with the most progress. It combines really well with Deadman Switch, and in the past, it even used to give you information of where the gen with the most progress was. I think this was one of the strongest and best overall perks in the entire game, and it rewarded a super aggressive playstyle, which I liked a lot. The worst one is Monstrous Shrine, but I will not talk poorly about this perk. It's actually not that bad overall, and I am so glad that it was buffed to being an actual perk with an use. This perk is here just because I had to rate one as the worst, and by itself, Monstrous Shrine is not that powerful. Let's talk about utility perks and the most useful ones, and in my opinion, Franklin's Demise is the best utility perk. I honestly think that this perk is really strong for the thing it does, as it can completely nullify a brown medkit without add-ons, or get rid of annoying flashlights and toolboxes that were not used at the start of the match, giving you extra slowdown if you think about it. Franklin's Demise works both as an utility perk, but also as a slowdown and massive annoyance to survivors. With survivors bringing more and more items nowadays, I feel like Franklin's is not a bad perk at all. The worst one, Zanshin Tactics. This perk is not worth it unless you have no other options or you are doing Oni's Adept achievement. It is an underwhelming perk, and it is not as useful as the Survivor's equivalent, Windows of Opportunity. Knowing where windows and pallets are can be useful the first time you play a map in DBD, but besides that, you will learn with time where everything is, and you will also know where the dropped pallets are as well. So it's not something very useful to have, and it does not give you a lot of utility. Let's talk about debuff perks now, and the best one is Sloppy Butcher. This is the most consistent debuff perk in the game. Unlike the rest of perks that most have a specific requirement to activate, Sloppy Butcher is a simple basic attack, and it will give the survivors both Mangled and Hemorrhage. These two status debuffs are very detrimental and make healing slower than usual, as well as removing most of the progress if the killer interrupts them healing themselves. This is the most consistent perk in the game, and with a healing meta it will always be useful except for killers that do not injure with basic attacks like Trickster, or killers that don't promote healing like Plague or Legion. The worst perk is Dragon's Grip. This was a hard choice, as I believe Blood Echo, Colrophobia, Septic Touch and Overwhelming Presence are also bad and below average perks, but Dragon's Grip takes the cake as it has one major problem with its design, and it's the fact that its cooldown is not only massive but also poorly done. Dragon's Grip gives exposed to the survivor that repairs a generator after it's being kicked, but only if they touch it before the effect expires. So the first problem is if an injured survivor touches the gen, then it becomes useless, and the second problem is that if nobody touches the gen, the perk enters a long cooldown. At least the other debuff perks have some consistent use. And now, for the endgame perks, we have the best, No Way Out. It is by far my favorite perk in the game, and I think it's one of the most useful perks, as there is no situation where it becomes completely useless. First of all, No Way Out guarantees a 60-second endgame extension if you hook all 4 survivors once in the match, which is a long time that can decide whether you get an extra kill or not, and it's basically an extra generator. Even if you don't get all 4 hooks, it still gives you a notification and 16 extra seconds. But the main power of this perk is that unlike the rest of endgame perks like Terminus or Blood Warden that only get value when you are losing, No Way Out gets even more value when you are winning by Stampede, as it basically guarantees you the 4k if you find the hatch, because once a survivor touches the exit gates, you will be notified and they won't have much time to escape from the door if you play it right. This perk is universal and it's extremely good on literally any killer in the game. And for the worst one, we have Fire Up. While I don't know if many of you will agree that Fire Up is an endgame perk, I decided to count it like so because it gets the highest strength on the endgame. And sadly, by the time the endgame begins, most of the pallets in the map will be gone, generators will be already fixed, and the rest of benefits are useful but not as impactful as the other endgame perks. However, I would not say that Fire Up is as bad as the other perks on each category, since it still gives you a slight boost through the match, which I find nice. Do you disagree with my choices? Please let me know in the comments. Thank you for watching and have a nice day.